Hello, my name is Daniel Grimes. You may already know that I have Hunter syndrome, but I'm a teenager now, so that means more questions. Now I have to answer them.
Daniel, how would you describe Hunter syndrome?
Hunter syndrome is a disease which your DNA is missing a link in its design which allows you to break down certain sugars, and the only way you can get rid of it is by stuffing it around in your body. One of the reasons I got Hunter syndrome was carpal tunnel.
One of your symptoms was carpal tunnel.
One of my symptoms was carpal tunnel.
Does Hunter syndrome ever scare or upset you?
Not exactly, no. When people start talking about things of the future, I get a little skittish.
Do you have any questions about your diagnosis?
Not that I already know of.
Is there a cure for Hunter syndrome?
No. There is a treatment which slows down the progression of Hunter syndrome, but there is no cure.
What kinds of tests and treatments have you had?
There's a lot of them, actually. I've had infusions. I've had hearing tests, breathing tests, blood tests. Their surgeries count. I've had a carpal tunnel surgery, a gastrocnemius release, I believe it was called, and also my port being added to me. I think that's all that comes to mind. Done.
What about non-surgery?
Non-surgery? Well, there's the blood tests, hearing tests, heart tests, forgot those, breathing tests, and...
What about treatments?
Treatments, which is infusion, AFOs, and I think braces would count. I think that's it, though.
Daniel did a really good job listing all of the different procedures and surgeries he'd had to have, but maybe thankfully he actually missed a few. He's had a lot throughout his life. He's had speech therapy throughout his preschool years. He's had physical and occupational therapies pretty much since we got the diagnosis. He's had to have many Botox injections into his legs, which thankfully we no longer have to do thanks to a gastrocnemius procedure. He's had sleep studies on twice. Well, he's had 2 sleep studies. The first for diagnosing sleep apnea and the second showing that it had cleared up, but the only reason it cleared up is because he's had his tonsils and adenoids out as well. He's had 6, maybe 7 sets of ear tubes, most of which were T-tubes for clearing out fluid behind his ears, and on 2 different occasions he's had to have hernia repair, so he's had a lot of procedures, and again, we're kind of grateful he doesn't remember them all.
How does it feel to wear leg braces, your AFOs?
Weird at first, but then throughout the day, you can barely notice they're there.
Do you have a favorite of all the tests that they've done?
If I had to pick one, That's a very good question. Treatment or test? Which one do I like? The breathing test is gonna be fun, for sure.
Ready? Biggest, big breath. Squeeze, squeeze. 4. Keep going. You're doing good. Keep going. Keep going. Suck it in.
Is there a test or a treatment that you really don't like?
Well, blood tests, for one. Don't like getting stuck with a needle. But I don't think any of the others I don't really like.
So you mentioned your port. What is it like having a port?
Just a big lump on your chest. You can't really feel it unless you touch it.
How did you get your port?
Surgery, I believe. Why did I say that?
How does your port work?
Well, first, when they access it, the Elaprase enters into my port, and from the port, it courses through the tube up into my veins, and the veins lead to the heart.
What is your port used for?
It's used for the infusion of Elaprase.
Do you know what Elaprase is or what it does?
No. Not entirely. All I know is it acts like a fake enzyme for a little while, just for, it acts like a fake enzyme for a week.
Does it hurt when they access your port?
Very little. Like, very, very little.
Can you describe or walk us through your infusion day?
It starts off with us just cleaning up what mess we have, and she usually calls around 8 o'clock telling us that she's on her way and asks how we're feeling, if they've been sick at all or anything. If we say yes, she usually gets around here around 8:30 to 8:45, and then she lays out the infusion supplies, and we access around 9, and then I wait a little bit for her to get the Elaprase all ready, and then the infusion usually starts around 9:05 or so.
What do you do during infusion?
Watch TV. Pretty much.
What is your favorite time of day?
Morning, because that's when I know my pet Daegu is all over the place, just excited to see me. Mostly defeated.
So what is your favorite food?
I discovered so much food. Most likely kimchi. I like that a lot. The classic pizza. And then chicken Alfredo is also really high up there.
If you could be a superhero, what powers would you want to have?
Superhuman strength and the ability to control the undead.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
I'm still thinking on that one. I don't know.
What is your favorite team of 6 non-legendary Pokemon? And why?
Ooh. That's a tough one. Lucario? Blaziken? Metagross? Garvantula? Walrein? And last one. Probably Gullerk. Because that team to me sounds like a very hard to fight against team. A lot of thick and powerful Pokemon.
What is your favorite thing to do in the winter?
Broomball or sledding. Either one of those.
What's your favorite thing to do in the summer?
Bike. Wholeheartedly. Bike.
Do you know how many miles you bike every day?
At least a mile. That's my bet.
What is your favorite kind of animal?
Ooh. Kind like in species or just straight up animal?
Any animal in the world. What kind of animal is your favorite?
I think wolves are pretty cool. I like those a lot.
What is it like being a teenager?
Different. But I can't really explain that well enough for you to understand.
What do you like to do in your free time?
Usually build with Legos.
Do you have a favorite book or book series?
Deltora Quest. That's one of my favorite series.
Do you have a favorite movie or show?
There are a lot of really good movies I like, but I don't have a favorite yet.
So what are your top 3?
Still too difficult. They're so good. There's so many good ones.
What about top 3 series?
Ooh. I'd probably put Lord of the Rings at the top. Then Avengers, and then Star Wars.
What is your favorite thing to do with your sister? Beside tease her.
Play board games or card games.
Susan, how would you describe your brother?
He's a very kind person who often does what you ask him, even when he doesn't want to, such as playing Life or other board games. And instead of I asked for 50 cents and got $100, I love him so much.
What are your favorite things to do with your brother?
I like to play board games and Legos and all sorts of things with him.
What is it like watching Daniel battle Hunter syndrome?
Not amazing, but not all that bad either.
Does it ever upset you?
Sometimes. Especially when he has to get infusions and forgets the goop or puts it on too late.
How would you describe your process of learning about Hunter syndrome?
What? I'm not sure I follow.
How have you learned about Hunter syndrome?
By listening in when you talk to Bev.
Well, how would you describe Hunter syndrome?
It's a disease that eats away at your body very slowly.
What do you know about Daniel's diagnosis?
Honestly, not much.
Do you have any questions about Daniel's diagnosis?
Not really, no.
Did or does any of this scare you?
It used to, but not really, not anymore.
Why?
Because I'm grown accustomed to it. I'm used to it.
Do you feel like you need to understand more about Daniel's condition to understand him?
No, I do not.
Do you feel like you understand Daniel's case well enough then?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Is there anything else that you want to say about Daniel?
He's a very good person and I'm glad he's my brother.
Do you have anything that you want to say specifically to Daniel?
Everything I just said. And I love you very much, Daniel.
What has been the most physically painful part of your journey with Hunter syndrome?
Probably the Botox. But I haven't gotten those in a long time, so I don't remember how much pain I felt, actually.
Who are your greatest heroes who help you in your battle with Hunter syndrome?
The doctors and nurses, for one. And mostly my relatives, basically. And Jesus and God. They all encourage me through everything I've been through. And I'm grateful for all of them.
What has been the most mentally difficult part of your journey?
The MRI, probably. Because I felt very scared during that one.
Who, in your battle with Hunter syndrome, makes you laugh the most?
It's a competition between Daddy and Gigi.
What is your greatest success?
How surprised my doctor was when he did the checkup on me for my legs and found out my legs were looser than kids my age usually were.
What are some of the things you are most thankful your parents have been able to help you with while dealing with Hunter syndrome?
moving around when I had my gastrocnemius release. And being there when I need the most.
What is your greatest challenge?
Either facing the Botox or the sleep-inducing mask. I had a hard time with that one too.
Have you met any other kids or adults with Hunter syndrome?
Not that come to mind, but I have seen actually a kid with AFOs. But I don't remember if I've ever met any Hunter syndrome patients.
Hello. Carolyn and Dan, parents, coming in to talk to you for a minute. Before we get into the questions that the kids had for us, I wanted to take a moment to address that last question. Daniel has not met anyone with Hunter syndrome, and a big part of that is because of me. At first, there were, it was protecting Daniel, making sure that he learned about his diagnosis without, kind of overwhelming him with someone who'd been in it for a while. Now, if it wasn't for COVID, there's actually some families that we've connected with that we would like to get together with and meet. The reason we haven't before now goes back to some hurt that took place right after we did Daniel's first video. We shared it with a community online full of Hunter syndrome and MPS II families. And several of them, when we shared it, said, "Oh, he's so lucky. He's not as sick as our kids." I had a conversation just after that with a friend who had another friend whose child was very, very ill. And, it's so much worse than Hunter syndrome. In both of those situations, we felt like we were being told that we didn't matter. That Daniel's journey didn't matter. Not as much as theirs, because they were more sick. God started teaching me something in those moments. A couple years later, I was having a conversation with a woman from church, and she was expressing some worry and some fear about some upcoming tests, medical tests, and doctors had been throwing around the word cancer. And halfway through our conversation, she stopped herself and she said, "I feel so silly right now because I shouldn't be worrying about this, or, you have so much more to worry about on a daily basis. It's silly for me to worry." And in that moment, God finally put everything together. And that is comparing, especially with medical issues, can be a very, very painful thing. It's a great tool. It's a good way to keep things in perspective. We know exactly how lucky we are, how lucky Daniel is and blessed to be able to communicate with us, to be able to walk, to focus solely on, well, they're so much worse off than we are. It either teaches us that we don't matter as much, or it teaches us to compare and hold ourselves, well, we suffer so much more than they do, so they don't matter. And there has to be a balance. You have to learn to put things in perspective and also reach out to lift others up. And comparing almost never lifts anyone up. So I just wanted to share that real quick. That was one of the reasons why he hasn't met anyone. It's something that I'm working past, thankfully, with God's help. And like I said, we do have some families that once all this COVID mess finally goes away and everyone's schedules open back up, we are trying to meet up with. So, hope that clarifies.
So these were questions that were written down by our kids to ask to us, and we're going to do our best to give you some answers to those. The first question they asked was, were you scared when you first heard about Daniel's disease?
Obviously. I was at home. Both kids were at school, and I can remember vividly. I got the phone call, and just kind of was in shock while talking to the doctor, and then hung up and did exactly what you should never do, and looked it up on Google while calling him at work.
Yeah, I got that call and did the exact same thing. I started Googling symptoms, which, by the way, don't do that while you're at work. And it was one of those moments where it was like a gut punch. Like, I'd already hung up and was just quickly looking through and saw the different things that were coming from this search result. And I called her right back and said, don't look this up, because I knew it was the kind of stuff that we really needed to look at more, because, you know, much like Googling symptoms, you're always going to see the worst possible scenario.
And especially with rare diseases like Hunter syndrome, they try to paint all the possibilities instead of saying, you know, every case is truly unique. And until you talk to your doctor, you know, you don't really have a good view of what's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those moments where, legitimate panic is the term I would use. I had no idea what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we both were there. So, the next question they asked was, where was God in that situation?
And for me, in particular, that kind of hit home. There's one of the few times, probably the only time I can really think of in my entire life, where I had to isolate myself from everything that was going on around me, and I stumbled into a different room, and all I could say was help. I didn't even know what I was asking for. It was just, I knew I needed help because I could not cope with the information I'd just been given. And it was just desperate pleading to God for help. And I think he has, and I think he has in a big way. I don't remember a lot of what happened right after that, but I do remember that I was able to collect myself, but it wasn't by my own strength, and was able to get myself home and be with Carolyn during that time, because this is something that just shatters your world. And when that happens, there's no amount of physical strength that'll let you hold on, no amount of mental fortitude that'll keep you centered.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely was a gut punch, and he never called me back to say he was coming home. But at that point, both of our kids were in school. I was home alone. Danny was allowed to come home from work early. And that truly was a God thing, that we had that afternoon then to just kind of cry and cope and get our reason back from, you know, the initial panic, to say, okay, but we really don't know anything until we talk to the doctors in person next week. And so it was, being able to get to that point and praying and feeling the peace, like, okay, you can let it go for this week. You can let it go. And while it was still in our minds, obviously, it was not, we were able to move on.
Took a while to process.
Yeah.
All right, so then the next question that they asked is, did Daniel's disease draw us closer to God? I'll take this one first. I think Daniel drew us closer to God, and his disease changed the form that took, but didn't necessarily change the process. I think that if God's in your life, he's a part of everything you do, and that includes raising children. Similar to the answer to our last question, there's a process to parenting that varies from child to child, and each one of them will make you grow in a direction. And by placing God first and foremost, you will wind up growing closer to him through the process. Has it led me to ask questions that I'd never asked before? Yeah, I would say it has. But I think Daniel would have made me ask those questions anyway. If I could pick one thing that I would say probably does stem from his condition, it would be the question of mortality. There was a time, especially early on, where we weren't sure that Daniel would be around for how long or what. It was a very real concern.
One of those Google things.
Yeah, and so at that time, I had to come to terms with the thought of, what do you do if you are fairly certain you're going to outlive someone that you love who depends on you? And that question was haunting. It's not something that you want to think about, but it constantly confronted us. And so for me personally, I came to understand through multiple deaths within our own family that death is a temporary thing for the Christian. It's a separation, but it's a good thing ultimately for those who are in Christ, because it's a form of healing. It's the promise of being back with our Creator in the state that we were intended to be from the beginning. So what I like to think of it as is Daniel doesn't really belong to us. He's not our child, at least not in the form of his spirit. He's God's child, and we were given temporary custodianship of him. We are to raise him, we are to teach him, we are to guide him, and we are to present him with the opportunity to make his own decisions. And that helps to mold the person he's going to become. He was given to us for a reason. I firmly believe that, and I think that part of that reason was to keep us introspective about our lives. Daniel specifically, he's a godsend. Susan was a godsend, and our relationship with each other, our relationship with God, it would look different no matter what we changed. So in this particular instance, I see Daniel as someone who will be called home at some point. I may be there for that, I may not. So I'm just going to focus on what I can do, which is do the job God gave me as his father, and try to present every possibility to him in a way that will allow him to make the right decisions in life. There's a scene in Evan Almighty where Morgan Freeman, who's playing God, shows up at a small restaurant, and there's a woman who is praying, and he tells her, when you pray for something, do you think God gives it to you, or do you think God gives you the opportunity to do it, to have it manifested in your life. And I think Daniel was an opportunity for that understanding and that process to manifest in our lives.
In my case, absolutely. When we got the diagnosis, I had just finished, just quit my job. And I had just finished working through some postpartum depression. And so trying desperately to keep my mind sane. It was daily, God, how do I do this? This is not in my plans. What do I do? About 3 months in, one of our doctors at U of M came and saw me while Daniel was infusing and said to me, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm okay. I'm coping. I'm dealing." And he says, "Are you actually?" And it made me pause. He says, "You know it's okay if you're not okay, right?" And that was the first time someone had given me permission to not be okay after his diagnosis. So I cried. And they said, "No, really, I really am okay. It's just, moments." And he says, "Okay, well, if you ever need to talk, we have a whole team here. You can always talk to us. We understand what you're going through, whatever." A couple weeks later, when we were preparing to transfer to do infusions closer to home, one of their staff members came in to speak with me to make sure that everybody was on the same page, everything was going well. And she asked the same question. She said, "How are you doing? Are you guys okay?" And in that moment when I was talking to her, I realized something. 5 months before we got Daniel's diagnosis, I quit my job. We went down to a one-income household, and we had several reasons why we had to do that. But in that moment, I just kind of stopped and I was dumbfounded, and I said, "You know what? I just realized something. Me quitting my job that long ago prepared us for this moment. Because with all the traveling we had to do at the beginning of Daniel's diagnosis, there would have been no way that I could have continued working. And we would have been, it would have been one extra stress. Having to quit and then go down to one income at that point. We had 5 months to adjust to being a one-income family, to figure out how this works before being thrown into this next stage of our journey. And in that moment, I realized exactly how much that meant and how uncertain we were when I quit. But every time something like that came up that, seemed like a bad thing or a stressful thing at the time, it was one of those little ways that God was taking care of us. And it's something we've seen a lot with Daniel. Just moments when we're surrounded by fear or anxiety and someone sends a card or a Bible verse pops up online, or we see a little M miracle of God working in a little tiny way that makes a huge difference. And having a child with a rare disease, there are so many questions that you really don't know how to answer. And kids always ask. And they've given us some really hard questions through the years. And each time, there was a little bit of God in them. And him teaching me a little bit more about himself so that I can teach them. And so that we can all grow closer to him. Because there is no way, I cannot imagine a way to survive this journey without him. He's been everything we need. So,
Master Oogway said, "Now on." No accidents. That's right. There are no accidents. There are no coincidences. There's just God moving in big and small ways.
And one of the other things, I know we're about ready to move on. One of the other things that God has taught me, I don't even remember which book it was in. I was in a Bible study or watching a movie. I don't even remember anymore. But there was this simple sentence. And it's a paraphrase from the Bible. And it said, God is sufficient. And while we know, without a shadow of a doubt, that if God wanted to, if it was in his plan, he could completely cure Daniel. And he could give us $1 million and all of our financial worries and all of our worries about our children, they could be gone in an instant. We know that. But we don't need that. We just need God. And anytime things have been overwhelming, there's been that still small piece that was enough, that was sufficient. And I don't need giant miracles to love him when I can see his sufficiency every day in our lives. So, last question. How do we see the future? What does our future look like? Our future looks like a one day at a time journey. And seeing what comes, because I can't tell what the future is going to hold.
Trying to remember who it was who said the life has to be lived forwards but can only be understood backwards. And you feel that a lot. We're living in a very tumultuous time, but that's been true for everybody. There's always things going on that throw wrenches into the works, things you're not expecting, be it as simple as car trouble or as large scale as a pandemic. We never are prepared for what the future looks like in terms of, well, I can see exactly where I'm going. And anyone who tells you that, well, they're not being truthful. There's a lot of...
They haven't met reality yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables that you'll never be able to account for, and we've come to terms with that in a way that allows us to live day by day. It's the only way you can live. You still make plans because you don't want to be caught completely off guard in case things go perfectly well, but you also have to learn to roll with the punches. When those plans make contact with most surfaces, they explode. So we've learned to adapt and to just adjust when we need to. We have a basic idea of what we want to do, and we move towards it. We're looking for a new home, for example. Will be one of the things that we're going to be trying to do here in the near future. But, well, guess what happened? The housing market went nuts. So you can never be prepared completely. Still, together, with God at the helm, I think that we can handle it.
Do you have any advice for someone who faces similar challenges in life?
Don't try to do everything by yourself. Always ask for help. That's probably the best advice I could give.
Does constantly being between medical appointments bother you or stress you out?
Bother, yes. Stress me out, no.
How does it bother you?
It's annoying from jumping from one place instantly to the next one as fast as we can.
What do you do when it's bothering you? How do you cope?
Usually just look out the window or live with it.
What gets you through the bad days?
Knowing that God is with me. And he also gave me amazing doctors and nurses, great parents, wonderful relatives, and a giggle bomb of a sister.
How has your faith helped you on this journey?
It gives me courage. When I had my MRI and when I had my surgeries, I got scared most of the time. So I asked Mommy if we could pray. For the MRI, it was just me and Mommy and I. But for the surgeries, it was usually a relative over the phone or G-Pop asking the church to pray for me as well. Whenever we prayed, afterwards, I would always feel like God was giving me peace of mind, making me calmer. My faith also makes me not as afraid of the future, because I know God is. I am in God's hands, and He gives me hope.
If you could tell the world one thing right now, what would it be?
I hope that God will open all of our eyes to see His truth and love.
Daniel, what is your biggest wish in life right now?
That God will keep me strong through the remainder of my journey through Hunter syndrome. And I would also like my own room. So, I want to say thank you to a lot of people, so let's get through them all. I want to say thank you to all of my followers on Facebook, even if I don't know some of you. I want to say thank you for everyone who's praying for me. I want to say thank you for my church, the church family. I want to say thank you for all of my friends who still treat me like a normal person even though I have Hunter syndrome. I want to say thank you for my family, enough said. And I want to say thank you to my nurses for all they do. I want to say thank you to Bev, my nurse who comes over every single week just to do my infusion. A huge thank you to all of my doctors. I wouldn't be here in the state I am without your guys' help. You know who you are. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all for watching. I hope I satisfied all your curiosity. But if you'll excuse me, I have to go. Allons-y.